Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to Cloudlearnerpro channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about Azure AD Connect. If you are looking to sync on-premise objects to Azure Active Directory, which is a cloud directory, we need to use Azure AD Connect tool. Via this video, I'm going to explain the end-to-end deployment of Azure AD Connect as well as how to promote a server as a domain controller. The Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync, I have divided into multiple sections, that is 9 sections. So I'm going to tell you what are those each lab section will be. First section will be creation of Azure Virtual Machine. After creating Azure Virtual Machine, we'll promote the Azure Virtual Machine as a domain controller, which means I will be installing Active Directory services in that Azure VM. Once the Azure Virtual Machine is promoted as domain controller, in that same server, I'll be creating users and groups. And I'll be considering that Azure Virtual Machine as a on-premise Active Directory. Then I will set up a new tenant in the Azure portal. New tenant is nothing but your new directory in the Azure portal. When we are setting up new tenant, as per my subscription or as per my account, which is a free trial account, I will get Azure AD free version. Once after that, we will log into Azure AD server, which is our on-premise domain controller. In that server, we will install Azure AD Connect tool. I'll show you how we can download Azure AD Connect package and how we can install in the domain controller server. After installation of Azure AD Connect, we will understand how on-premise objects will be synced to Azure AD Connect. Then after that, I'll also demonstrate how we can manually sync on-premise objects to Azure. Like I'll show you the PowerShell commands using which we can sync on-premise objects to Azure. After completing all these 8 steps, we'll go to the 9th step, that is the validation of on-premise objects in the Azure cloud. So if all the points or all the tasks till 8, if they are successful, we should be able to see on-premise objects in the Azure Active Directory. So let's go and perform the hands-on lab on Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync, guys. So for that, what I told you, I will be having Active Directory domain controller service and I'll be having Azure Active Directory service. So here I will be using Azure AD Connect service, using which I'm going to sync between on-premise Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, which is called as a directory sync. So let's go to the first lab, that is create Azure Virtual Machine in the Azure portal. Now we will perform the first lab, that is creation of virtual machine in the Azure portal. I'll click on virtual machine blade and I'll click on create Azure virtual machine. In the create virtual machine blade, I'm going to fill the details in the basic blade. I'm selecting a subscription. I'm selecting a resource group. Then I'm going to provide a virtual machine name, that is a DC VM. Then I'm selecting a region as West Europe. Availability, no infrastructure redundancy is required. Image, I'm selecting 2019. Then virtual machine size will be 4 CPU, 16 GB memory. Username will be Azure admin, and I'm providing a password for this username. So once after providing username and password, I'm going to the next option, that is public inbound port. I'm enabling RDP port 3389. Then I'm clicking on review plus create because I want to create a virtual machine with a basic configuration. I'm not looking for any customized configuration. For that, I'm going to provide only basic details and I'm going to create the virtual machine. So if I go and click on create button, it will start deploying the virtual machine. So once the virtual machine is deployed, we'll go to the overview section and we'll understand the details from there. So this is the first lab. The deployment will take some time. So I'm going to skip the time that is going to take for the deployment, and I'll take you to the page where the deployment will show as completed. Now you can see the deployment is completed. I'll click on go to resource. You can see the virtual machine name as DC-VM, and it is created with a Windows operating system with 4 CPU and 16 GB of memory. So the first task is completed. Now we will go to the second task.
Let's perform lab number 2, that is promoting Azure Virtual Machine as a domain controller. Let's perform the lab and understand the steps in detail.
The second lab will be promoting this Azure Virtual Machine into domain controller. For that, first step will be go to the networking of a DC-VM. In the networking blade, click on network interface. After clicking on network interface, click on IP configuration. In the IP configuration, click on IP config. Here, go and click on static option. This will change virtual machine private IP address assignment into static. So I'm going to click on save. So once this configuration is saved, we will log into the virtual machine and will promote the virtual machine into domain controller. We can see now the static IP address assignment is successfully updated. Now I'll go back to the virtual machine overview page. I'll copy the public IP address of virtual machine. I'll open MSTSC in my laptop. I'll paste the IP address. I'll use the credentials like Azure admin and password that I provided during the virtual machine creation. You can see I'm able to connect to this virtual machine. The connection is successful. So it is loading the profile of Azure admin. Since we are logging in for the first time, this is a freshly created virtual machine. So it will take little time compared to normal to load the user profile services. Once the user profile is loaded, I'll show you how we can promote this server as a domain controller. Now you can see I have logged into the server. I'm going to expand the RDP session. In this particular server, I'm going to click on this server manager widget that is already in open. I'm going to click on manage. I'm going to click on add roles and features. Then you can see add roles and features widget. Click on next button. Again, click on next button. Click on next. Here, I'm going to check box for Azure Active Directory service. I'll click on add features. Then I'm going to enable the DNS service as well. I'm clicking on add features. I'll click on continue. So with this, I'm going to enable or I'm going to install Azure Active Directory domain services along with DNS server. I'm going to click on next. Features, I'm not changing anything. I'm going with the default features, which is required for the DNS and domain controller service. In the next page, it is showing me overview about Active Directory domain services. If I click on next, it is showing me overview about DNS service. Then I'm going to click on next, which is the confirmation page. If you want to restart the server automatically, you can click on this box and you can click on install. So I'm going to install this service manually and I'm going to restart this server also manually. So I'm clicking on install button. So this will start deploying Active Directory service and domain controller service. So I'll take you to the page where this installation will be shown as completed. Now you can see the installation is successful on DC VM. So it is asking for the configuration. For this, I'm going to click on close button. Go and click on the exclamatory symbol. Here you can see post deployment configuration. It is saying promote this server to a domain controller. Click on this option. Here you can see Active Directory domain service configuration widget. I'm going to create a new forest here. For this, I'm going to give a root domain name that is Cloudlearnerpro.com. Then I'm going to click on next. It is going to create a new forest for us. I'm going to give a password for this particular forest. Then I'm going to click on next button. Here, as I mentioned, I'm going to create a DNS server, right? So I'm going to click on next. Then additional or optional features for your domain controller. If you want to give it as NetBIOS name, assign something and all, you can enable it. If you don't want, you can just go with the next option. then it is going to talk, or it is going to ask you about path, like in which path it is going to create the database folder for the Active Directory domain services, where it is going to create the log files, where it is going to create the sysvol folder, like NTDS and sysvol folders. This is by defaultly created in C Windows folder of this domain controller server. Next, I'm going to click on review options. Like in case if you want to see the details of the Active Directory domain controller promotion, you can see all those details here. Once after that, you can click on next. It is going to perform some prerequisites check. In case if there are any errors, it will show the errors here. If there are any kind of prerequisites that needs to be met, it will display the details like this. So I know that this is the general or common prerequisite options. Even without fixing this also, I can able to promote the domain controller since we are doing a lab here. So I'm going to click on next, install. You can see now you're about to sign out. The computer is being restarted because Active Directory domain services was installed or removed. We have installed Active Directory domain services, right? That is the reason it is automatically logged me out from the server. So after some time, if I log in, I will be able to see the server with domain services. Now let me try to connect to the server. I'll copy the public IP address and I'll open MSTC again, and I'll try to connect to the server by providing the credentials. I'm logging into the server. Now, once I log into the server, right, I'll show you the server is part of domain now. Since the server is promoted as a domain controller, it is taking long time for the profile to load. So I'm just going to skip this time, which is taking for the user profile to load inside the server. And I'll take you to the screen where the user profile service is successfully loaded inside the server. Now we can see the user profile is successfully loaded inside the server. I'll open the File Explorer inside the server, and I'll go to the properties of this PC. Once I open the properties, you will be able to see the domain here as cloudlearnerpro.com, and you can see the full computer name as dc-vm.cloudlearnerpro.com. This is called as FQDN, fully qualified domain name, and this is the domain name that we created. So if I go to the server manager, in the server manager, you can see Active Directory domain services. You can either click on Active Directory domain services here, or you can go and click on tools, and you can see Active Directory users and computers. You can see so many Active Directory services, but in this lab, we are going to work with Active Directory users and computers. I'm going to click on this. It is going to launch Active Directory users and computers wizard. Here, if I click on cloudlearnerpro.com, this is the domain.
Now we will perform lab number 3, that is create users and groups in On-prem AD. I'll be creating users and groups as per the data that has been presented on the screen. Let's go and perform the lab.
Now we will go to the third lab, that is creating of users and groups in the Active Directory. So what I'm doing is I'm going to click on this domain. I'm going to click on new organization unit. I'm providing the name as Azure Sync Group. Clicking on OK. You can see the Azure Sync Group is created. In this group, I'm creating a test user, test1, and the user logon name as test1. I'm clicking on next. I'm providing a password here. Either you can create the users manually, or you can create the users using a PowerShell script or PowerShell command. Depending on your requirement, you can choose any one of the method and you can create the users. Likewise, you can create a user group also. I'm creating user group. I'm creating user group as well. Same thing, even for user group, either you can create via a GUI or you can create via PowerShell script or PowerShell commands. So I'll create a couple of user IDs and user groups, and I'll show you the final list of users and groups here. So these are the list of users and groups that I have created. These objects I will sync to Azure Active Directory by using Azure AD Connect tool in the further labs.
I'll perform fourth and fifth lab combinedly, whereas I'll create a new tenant in the Azure Active Directory portal. I'll create Cloudlearnertest.com as a new tenant, and this tenant will be a Azure AD free license. I'm not going to upgrade it to premium because even with Azure AD free license, we can perform Azure Sync tool.
Now we will go to the next lab, that is creating a new tenant in the Azure Active Directory. If I click on Azure Active Directory here, I can see already I have one tenant. Either I can use this or I can create a new one as per the choice or requirement. For now, I'll just show you how to create a new tenant in the Azure portal. For that, click on Manage Tenants and click on Create button here and select Azure Active Directory in the basic plate. Go to Next Configuration. Here, provide the organization name. I am providing cloudlearnertest.com, and initial domain name I'm giving cloudlearnertest01. If it is already used, it will show the error saying it's already in use. If it is not showing any error, that means we can use this initial domain name. And I'm providing the country name, India. And then I'm going to click on Review plus Create. And I'm clicking on Create button. So I'm going to pass some steps where I have to confirm I'm not a bot. So tenant creation is in progress. This will take few minutes. So when we are creating a tenant in the Azure portal, so this will be creating a new Azure Active Directory tenant for us in the same account. So we can either switch across the tenants and we can work with multiple tenants in a single account itself. So we'll wait for this tenant to be created and I'll resume to the same page where the tenant creation is successful. You can see now the cloudlearnertest.com tenant is created. Now I'm going to switch to this tenant. I'll click on the cloudlearnertest.com and I'll click on switch tenant. Now it is taking me to the new tenant that I created. So this is the lab that I mentioned, how to create a tenant in the Azure Active Directory portal. For that, what I have did, I have went to manage tenants. Here I click on create and I created a new tenant. After we switch to the new tenant that we created, cloudlearnertest.com, you can see the details here. Like the name is cloudlearnertest.com. You can see the tenant ID. You can see primary domain like cloudlearnertest01.onmicrosoft.com. In organizations, if they want to have their custom primary domain names, they can choose the domain name like example, Infosys, HCL, Wipro. They can have their uh, domain name here like wipro.onmicrosoft.com, infosys.onmicrosoft.com. They can choose as per their requirements and they can get the primary domain name here. Here I'm having Azure AD free license. In case if you want to get Azure premium license also, you can upgrade it.
We are going to lab number 6 now, that is install Azure AD Connect on the on-premise domain controller. Let's understand the steps that are involved in this Azure AD Connect installation.
Now we will go to the next lab, that is installing of Azure AD Connect in the Active Directory server. For that, I'm going to click on this Azure AD Connect, go to Azure AD Connect. Here you will get the option to download this package. Click on download Azure AD Connect, which will download the Azure AD package for you. So in this page, just click on download. Your package will be downloaded. You need to copy this package to the domain controller where you have Active Directory services. Now I have copied Azure AD Connect package to this domain controller server. I'm going to install this package. For that, I'm just double clicking on it. It is showing me message saying installing Microsoft Azure AD Connect. You can see one icon is also generated and the same application is launched here. So I'm going to click on agree license terms. I'm clicking on continue. Here I'm going to use the express settings and here I'm going to provide Azure Active Directory credentials. I'll provide the credentials here. And once after entering the credentials, I'll click on next.
What it does means it is going to connect to Microsoft Online to verify the credentials. If the credentials that I provided here are valid, then it will go to the next step. So these credentials, whatever I provided, it should be part of global administrator in that particular tenant. Then only it will be able to sync, or it will be able to perform the sync operation. Now I have to provide on-premise Active Directory user ID, where that user ID should be part of enterprise admin credentials. Okay, so now I'm going to provide the same credentials that I have already created. Let me provide the domain name, Cloudlearnerpro / Azure admin, and the password. And now I'll next. After you click on next, it will show you what are the components that are going to be installed. So all these components that will be installed once I click on install. So let me click on this button. So it will start installing this components in this particular domain controller. So I'll come to the page where this installation will be completed, because this installation will take long time. So I'll skip that part in the recording. I'll come to the page where this installation will be successful. Now we can see the Azure AD Connect is installed successfully, and there is some information which is available here. In case if you want to enable recycle bin for your on-premise Active Directory, you can go and enable. So this configuration is completed. I'm going to click on exit. We are jumping on to lab number 7 now. The lab number 7 is about how the objects from on-premise will be synced to Azure AD when we install Azure AD Connect tool. So there will be a sync called full synchronization, using which all the on-prem objects will be synced to Azure AD. So let's understand in detail about full synchronization in the labs. Now I'm going to show you the service that is used for the sync between on-premise and Azure Active Directory. For that, I'm going to the domain controller start button. I'm typing sync. You can see the synchronization service. Once I click on that particular application, it will launch like this, and you will see there is some domain name here, and it is performing some operations which are showing as success. So it is performing the sync between on-premise to Azure, and the sync type is full synchronization, and the status of this synchronization is successful. This full synchronization is successful. Now if I go to users blade, for example, and if I click on refresh, I should be able to see the on-premise users. See here, I can able to see on-premise directory synchronization service here, and I can see on-premise users. If I go to groups, for example, I can see on-premise groups that are created. See, I have created 3 groups, that is test group 1, 2, and 3. All these groups are synced from on-premise to Azure. Same likewise, users also synchronize from on-premise to Azure. Now we are going to lab number 8, that is manual sync of on-prem objects to Azure Cloud. Here we are going to use PowerShell modules to sync the on-premise objects to the Azure Cloud. Let's perform the lab and understand in detail. Now we'll try to understand how we can sync Azure AD Connect manually. For that, just open PowerShell in this domain controller server in the admin mode. Now I have opened PowerShell in the admin mode. Using the PowerShell, we will be able to manually sync the on-premise objects to Active Directory. But before that, I'll run one command to show you the time interval of every sync between on-premise to Active Directory. So if I run this command, you will be able to see the result of the AD sync scheduler. See, the AD sync scheduler is scheduled for every 30 minutes to sync between on-premise to Azure. This is the default sync interval that is being recommended by Microsoft. In case if you want to reduce this time, you can reduce it, but it is not recommended by Microsoft. You can have some custom scripts using which you can able to sync your on-premise objects to Azure with less interval compared to 30 minutes. Now I will go and give you the command, or I will run the command in the screen, which will trigger the sync between on-premise to Azure manually now. So this is the command start-ad sync cycle -policy type delta. Using this command, we will be able to manually sync the on-premise objects to Azure objects. So now I'll create one test object for our testing purpose. I'll create one test user. I'll say sync test. And I'll create this user ID. I created this sync test user ID in the domain controller server, but this user ID is not available in the Azure Active Directory. So as per Azure sync cycle, every 30 minutes it will sync, but we are going to force this sync between on-premise and Azure by running a PowerShell command. So if I run this command now, so it is going to sync between on-premise objects and Azure objects. So once this particular job is successful, I will be able to see this sync cycle again. Let me refresh this. So I will be able to see this sync cycle where it is showing delta import is successful and one more delta import is in progress. So once this particular job gets completed, I will be able to see the object in Active Directory Azure. Now I can see the delta synchronization is successful and even the export is also successful. Now if I go to Azure Active Directory, I will be able to see the new Active Directory object that I created here, that is sync test, that should be available in the Azure Active Directory as well. Let me go to Azure Active Directory portal now. I'm in the Azure Active Directory portal. I'll click on refresh here. Once I clicked on refresh, I can see sync test here. So which proves that if we are running a manual sync between on-premise to Azure, we will be able to sync the objects. So this proves that by using the PowerShell commands, we will be able to force the sync between on-premise to Azure Active Directory. So what we did here, we sync this sync test user account from on-premise to Azure Active Directory by using this PowerShell commands. So this is the manual way of syncing on-premise objects to Azure Active Directory. Now we came to the final step, that is validating of sync objects in the Azure cloud. When we validate or when we verify the objects in the Azure cloud, we should be able to see the on-premise objects that are synced to Azure cloud successfully. So let's perform this validation and finalize the lab number 9. If I come to the final step, so the final step is to validate whether all the on-premise objects are available in the Azure Active Directory. So in on-premise, we have four users, sync test, test 1, test 2, and test 3, and we have 3 groups. I can see all the users here, as well as I can see user groups also that are synced to Azure Active Directory. So this proves that the lab that we perform is successfully completed.
Here comes the end of the session. So if you are liking the content that I'm uploading in the YouTube channel, please subscribe to my channel, and in fact you can share my channel with your friends for whom it will be helpful. Thank you so much.